I didn't plan to camp alone that October. I was 31 at the time, working long hours, barely sleeping, and I felt like the noise of the city was slowly crushing me. A friend told me about a quiet place in northern Arizona, far from the usual camping spots. He said hardly anyone went there anymore because the land was dry, the trails were rough, and most people didn't want to bother with the long drive off the main roads. That sounded perfect to me. I wanted silence and a place where nobody would walk by my tent at night. I left early in the morning, driving through empty highways as the sun came up. The sky was pale orange, with the light slowly stretching across the desert. I had everything packed: tent, food, emergency gear, a small first aid kit, and a GPS unit that was supposed to work even in remote areas. The deeper I drove into the backcountry, the rougher the ground became. The dirt road was covered in sharp rocks, and the car shook hard every few minutes. Dust kept rising behind me, making a thin cloud that followed me like a tail. By noon, I reached the end of the road. From there, I had to hike to a small flat area near a dry riverbed. The wind was light but steady, carrying the smell of dust and old wood. I set up my tent under a low cliff that provided a bit of shade. The rock surface was warm to the touch, almost hot. I laid out my gear, checked my water, and ate a simple meal. Everything felt normal, quiet, peaceful, exactly what I wanted. For a few hours, I just wandered around. The land stretched out in every direction, covered in short brush and scattered rocks. The colors were muted shades of brown, faded green, and patches of gray dirt. I found tracks here and there. Most looked like deer, some like coyotes. Nothing unusual. The sun began to fall behind the cliffs, and shadows grew longer and colder. By the time I crawled into my tent that night, the temperature had dropped fast. I didn't sleep right away. The desert air carried small noises, tiny cracks from cooling rocks, distant rustling from dry plants, the light tap of something small moving near the tent. But I had camped enough times to know these sounds were normal. I finally drifted off sometime after midnight. I woke up to a strange sound. It wasn't loud, but it was close, too close. It sounded like something dragging lightly across the ground, slow and careful. My eyes were wide open immediately. I didn't move. I didn't breathe too hard. I listened. The sound stopped. Then it started again, but this time on the other side of the tent. Slow, almost soft, like someone trying not to be heard but still brushing against dirt and leaves. I felt a cold pressure in my chest. I told myself it could be a deer, maybe a coyote. Animals wandered at night all the time, but the steps were too controlled, too deliberate. There was weight behind them, but also caution, almost like the thing was testing the area. I lay still until the noises faded. I didn't sleep anymore. I just stayed awake, listening to the wind scrape over the tent fabric until dawn. When sunlight finally hit the desert, I crawled out and checked the ground around the campsite. I found tracks, but they didn't look right. They were shaped like footprints but stretched out, too long, almost uneven, as if the person, or whatever it was, walked on the edges of the feet or didn't know how to place them naturally. The tracks circled my tent once and then wandered off toward the dry riverbed. My throat tightened. I looked around and saw nothing but wide, empty land. I tried to explain it away. Maybe the prints were distorted by wind or loose dirt. Maybe someone had walked through earlier and I hadn't noticed. Still, I packed my things tighter, checked my gear again, and carried a heavy piece of wood with me when walking around. I didn't want trouble, but I also didn't want to feel helpless. The day passed slowly. I walked the trails near the cliffs, keeping close to the camp. Everything felt normal again, but my nerves stayed tense. Every small sound made me look around. Every shadow felt like it moved a little too fast. By evening, I felt tired, but not in a peaceful way. More like my body was drained from staying alert for hours. As the sun dropped, the desert cooled quickly. I made a small fire to keep myself busy. The orange light reflected off the rocks, making them look alive for a moment before fading back into still shapes. When the fire burned down to glowing embers, I crawled into the tent again. This time I kept a flashlight in my hand. I didn't know when I fell asleep, but I woke again hours later. This time the sound wasn't scraping or dragging. It was breathing. Slow, steady, careful breaths coming from just outside the thin fabric of the tent. My skin went cold instantly. I couldn't see anything, but I felt the presence, the weight of it, the sense that something stood right on the other side of the wall. The breathing was low, almost controlled, like someone trying to copy how a human breathes but not getting it quite right. The rhythm was uneven, too shallow, then too deep. My body froze. The air in the tent felt trapped, like the space had shrunk around me. Then I heard movement. Something shifted, crouched maybe, or leaned close. I could almost feel pressure against the tent without anything actually touching it. My heart beat so loud I felt it in my teeth. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then a soft thump like a footstep. Then another. Slow steps moving toward the back of the tent. I held my breath, gripping the flashlight so hard my fingers hurt. The steps moved around, pausing at random points like the thing was trying to figure something out. And then I heard a sound I will never forget. Not a voice, not a word. More like something trying to make a sound it didn't understand. A half-formed noise, stretched and broken, as if it had heard a human once and was trying to copy it without knowing how. The sound rose and fell, cracked and twisted. My whole body felt like it locked up. I didn't move. Eventually, after what felt like hours, the steps drifted away. I waited until dawn before even thinking about leaving the tent. When I stepped outside, the tracks were clearer than before, long, uneven, almost human but wrong in a subtle way. They circled the tent twice that night. They stopped at the entrance. They stopped at the back. And they led off into the distance, fading into the dry ground. I didn't pack slowly. I didn't stop to eat. I threw everything into my bag, yanked the stakes from the ground, and left the campsite without looking back. The hike to the car felt endless. Every time the wind moved, I flinched. Every time I saw a shadow shift on a rock, I felt a jolt run through my chest. When I finally reached the car, the sun was high, but the heat didn't calm me. Dust kicked up behind the tires as I drove as fast as the road allowed. I didn't stop until I reached a small gas station miles away, filled with people, noise, signs, fuel pumps, normal life. Only then did I feel like I could breathe again. I told myself it had to be a person. Maybe someone living off the land, maybe someone unstable, someone who moved strangely and watched campsites at night. There are people who stay in remote areas for their own reasons, and not all of them want to be found. That explanation made more sense than anything else. But even now, years later, when I think about those footsteps circling my tent and that broken attempt at making a human sound, I still get the same tight feeling in my chest. I still see those long, stretched footprints in the dirt. I still remember the slow, uneven breathing and the feeling that something stood inches from me, studying me in the dark, trying to decide what I was. I never went back to that area again, and I don't camp alone anymore. Not anywhere, not even in safe, crowded places. Some things you can push out of your mind for a while, but they never really fade. Because whatever I heard out there in the desert, whatever walked around my tent and breathed like it was practicing being human, it was real. And knowing that is enough. I had decided to take a short trip into the northern woods of Alberta in the early fall of 2019. I was 26 at the time, tired from long work weeks, and I wanted to be alone for a while, away from my phone, traffic, and people. The weather had been getting colder, especially at night, but the days still felt warm enough to camp without freezing. I packed my old tent, a sleeping bag that was thicker than it needed to be, a small stove, some canned food, and enough water for a couple of days. My plan was simple and quiet. Hike for half a day, set up camp near a small clearing I had seen on a map, and stay there for one night or maybe two if things felt good. The forest looked peaceful when I arrived. The leaves were turning orange and dull yellow, and the air smelled like wet soil even though it hadn't rained for 2 days. The sun still sat high when I started walking. The trail wasn't official, not one of the tourist ones. It was narrow, filled with roots, and felt like it hadn't been used much that season. Small birds hopped between low branches, and the only sounds were the crunching of old leaves under my boots and the wind moving slowly through the tall trees. For most of the walk, I felt calm, like I had stepped out of the world and into something older and quieter. After around 4 hours of steady hiking, I reached the clearing I had planned on using. The ground was mostly flat with a few stones, and there were thin pine trees circling around it like they were guarding it. A fallen log sat on the far side, half covered in moss. It looked perfect for the night. Nothing strange, nothing out of place. I dropped my backpack, set up my tent, and stretched my legs. My back cracked loudly, and the cold wind made me rub my arms for warmth. I spent some time collecting small branches and dry twigs to start a fire before sunset. By the time the sky turned a soft pink, I had a small fire going. I heated a can of soup on the little stove because the fire alone wasn't strong enough yet. I ate slowly, staring at the flames while everything around me grew darker. The forest changed its tone after sunset. The friendly daytime noises became sharper and shorter. Every snap of a branch made my head twitch in its direction. But I wasn't scared, just alert, the way anyone becomes when they camp alone. When the sky finally turned dark, I crawled into my tent. The air was colder than I expected, and I wrapped myself tightly in my sleeping bag. The fire outside burned low, but the faint orange glow comforted me. I stared at the thin fabric of the tent ceiling and listened to the forest. There were distant sounds of something walking, maybe a deer, maybe a fox, occasional rustling in the bushes, branches shifting from the wind. Nothing unusual. I closed my eyes and drifted into a light, shallow sleep that didn't feel like real rest. I woke up sometime after midnight. The air inside the tent felt colder and almost thin. My breath came out as a small cloud. I didn't know what woke me at first, but then I heard it. Something faint and irregular, like a crack against frozen soil. It wasn't rhythmic, not the normal pattern of animals walking. It was slower, heavier, and spaced strangely. I lay still, holding my breath for long moments. The fire had gone out hours ago, and the forest was so dark that even the tent felt like a void around me. After a few minutes, the sound faded. I told myself it could have been anything, an animal slipping on wet ground, branches shifting under weight. I tried to sleep again, but my mind kept waking me up. Eventually, when the sky outside started turning into a very faint gray, I gave up and got out of the tent. I stretched my legs and turned on my flashlight. The light beam cut through the trees, and the forest looked normal again. Damp ground, fallen leaves, and endless trunks stretching outward. The air smelled colder than it should. I decided to take a short walk around the clearing to settle my thoughts. Sometimes walking made me feel grounded. A few minutes from my campsite, I noticed something odd. The soil looked disturbed, not like footprints, but like something had been dragged or pushed unevenly. I followed the marks without thinking much. It didn't take long before the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like something spoiled, but it grew stronger with every step. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly what kind of smell it was, even though I had never smelled it this strongly before. It was the smell of rot, heavy and sour. My flashlight landed on something pale between two fallen branches. I froze. For a second, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then the shape became clear. It was a human leg.
Bare.
Stiff, The skin was a strange color, almost gray. My whole body tensed, but I forced myself to move the light again. A few inches away, mostly hidden by leaves, was the rest of the body. A man, lying face down, wearing a torn jacket that looked like it had been dragged across rough ground for a long time. His hair was matted, his skin cold and lifeless, his hands stiff at his sides. He looked like he had been there for days, maybe longer. I felt my heartbeat start pounding so fast it made my neck pulse. The forest around me suddenly looked different. Every shadow felt sharper. Every tree looked like it was watching me. I wanted to run, but I couldn't force my legs to move. I crouched down slowly, making sure not to touch anything. The man had bruises on the back of his neck and dirt packed into his fingernails. Something bad had happened to him, something violent enough to leave him hidden in a place barely anyone passed through. My mind raced as I looked around the forest, checking every direction. I didn't see anyone. I didn't hear anyone, but the silence felt heavier than before, like the woods were holding their breath. I backed away slowly until I reached the clearing. My hands were shaking. I packed my things as fast as I could. I kept glancing at the tree line every few seconds, expecting someone, to appear. Nothing did, but the fear was still there, pressing against the back of my skull. The hike back felt longer, colder, and completely different from the day before. I didn't stop once. I didn't look behind me even when I felt like something was there, unseen. My legs moved faster than I wanted them to, and each sound in the forest made my heart drop. By the time I reached my car, my shirt was damp with sweat even though the morning air was freezing. When I drove away from the dirt road and finally saw other cars on the highway, the relief hit me so hard I felt lightheaded. My hands shook on the steering wheel. I didn't call for help until I reached a gas station more than an hour away. I gave the location as best as I could, told them what I saw, and then sat in my car with the engine still running, staring at the empty road. Later, I found out that the police reached the area and confirmed there was a body. They didn't share many details. They only said the man had likely been dead for a while. The cause wasn't something they were ready to announce. All they needed from me was the exact path I took, what time I arrived, and what I saw. After that, they let me go. Weeks passed, and nothing new came out in the news. No identity, no story, no explanation. Just silence. I still think about it sometimes, especially at night when the world is quiet and my thoughts get louder. I wonder who he was, what happened to him, and whether whoever left him there was still out in those woods when I slept only a few hundred steps away. But the thing that stays with me the most is not the body itself. It's the sound that woke me that night. The slow, heavy, uneven crack on the forest floor. Every time I replay it in my head, I feel the same cold pressure in my chest. I know it wasn't an animal, and I know I wasn't alone out there. It was the summer of 2019, and I decided to take a solo camping trip in the dense forests near the northern edge of Minnesota. I was 27 at the time, recently out of college, and I needed some time alone to think. I packed my small, worn-out backpack with essentials: a tent, sleeping bag, water filter, some granola bars, a small camping stove, and a flashlight. My old pickup truck rattled along the dirt roads until I finally reached a secluded spot by the edge of a small lake. It was the perfect place, or so I thought. The first day was calm. I set up my tent near a cluster of pine trees, a safe distance from the water, but close enough to hear the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. I collected firewood, feeling the rough bark against my hands and the dry needles underfoot. By evening, the sky was a deep orange, and I cooked a simple meal of canned beans and instant rice. The sun disappeared behind the trees, and darkness settled quickly. I could hear the distant calls of loons from the lake and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Felt peaceful, almost too peaceful. The first night was uneventful. I slept fitfully in my tent, hearing the familiar sounds of the forest. Whined through the trees, the snap of twigs under unseen feet, and the soft splash of water. But when I woke just before dawn, I noticed something strange. The firewood I had stacked perfectly was now scattered around in a rough circle. At first, I thought maybe an animal had disturbed it, but the placement seemed deliberate, almost like someone or something had walked around it. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was the wind or a raccoon, and went about my morning routine. I spent the day hiking along a narrow trail that followed the edge of the lake. The forest was dense, the kind where the sunlight barely reached the ground, making shadows cling to every tree. I noticed animal tracks in the mud. Deer, raccoon, maybe even a coyote. But then I saw something odd. Footprints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were human-shaped but larger than mine, with deep impressions as if someone heavy had been walking through the soft soil. I froze, scanning the surrounding trees, but saw nothing. I shook my head and convinced myself it was just a hunter who had passed by days before. That night, I built a fire closer to my tent, making sure it was big enough to feel safe. I cooked another simple meal, and the flames cast dancing shadows around the clearing. Around midnight, I woke to a faint sound, something like dragging. It was slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the trail I had walked earlier. I froze, my heart hammering. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound. The beam caught movement. A figure at the edge of the tree line, tall and hunched, staying just out of clear view. I stayed completely still, holding my breath. The figure didn't move for a long minute, just stood there, almost blending into the shadows. Then it slowly disappeared behind a thick cluster of pines. My mind raced. Maybe it was a lost hiker, maybe someone else camping, maybe a deer standing on its hind legs. I didn't know, but something in the way it moved felt deliberate, almost like it was studying me. Sleep was impossible after that. I kept the fire going through the night, poking it repeatedly to keep the flames alive. Every snap of a twig made me tense. Every rustle of leaves made me jump. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next morning, I decided to leave the lake area and explore another part of the forest, hoping distance would make me feel safer. I packed up my tent, double-checked my supplies, and started hiking down a narrow, overgrown trail. The trees pressed in on either side, and the air smelled damp and earthy. I tried to enjoy the hike, but unease clung to me like a second skin. About 2 miles into the trail, I stumbled upon my first clear sign that I wasn't alone. A small clearing, and in the center, fresh footprints, definitely human. They were massive, over a foot long, and led deeper into the forest. My stomach sank. I wanted to turn back, but something compelled me to keep going, partly curiosity, partly the nagging fear that if I ran, whoever or whatever was out here might follow me. I spent the rest of the afternoon hiking cautiously, constantly scanning the tree line. Shadows seemed to shift when I looked away, and I kept hearing that dragging sound from last night, faint but persistent. I found no one, no signs of a campsite, nothing except footprints and the occasional broken branch, as if someone heavy had moved through the forest carelessly. As evening approached, I realized I needed to set up camp again, but I wanted a safer spot this time. I found a small plateau overlooking a dry creek bed. It was elevated, giving me a clear view of the surrounding trees. I pitched my tent quickly, collected firewood, and built a fire that roared against the growing darkness. Around midnight, the sound came again, closer this time, slow, heavy steps, dragging something along the ground. I shone my flashlight in every direction. The beam caught movement, a tall figure standing on the opposite side of the creek bed. I could barely make out details, but I saw its shape clearly. Broad shoulders, unnaturally tall, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. It didn't approach, didn't run, just stood there, staring. I stayed motionless for what felt like an eternity, then slowly retreated into my tent, leaving the flashlight on near the opening. The fire crackled and popped, and for hours I listened, tense, as the figure remained outside. The dragging sound stopped around 3 a.m., and silence returned to the forest. The next morning, I packed everything with meticulous care. I didn't want to leave anything behind that could slow me down. I hiked back the way I came, constantly checking over my shoulder. The footprints from the previous day had disappeared, as if the figure had vanished entirely. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, heart pounding, hands shaking, and sweat cooling on my skin despite the chilly morning air. Driving away from the forest, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The road stretched in front of me, empty and silent, and I didn't look back. Weeks later, I found out that area had reports of poachers who would stalk secluded campers, sometimes dragging dead animals or heavy loads through the forest to avoid detection. It made perfect sense, the dragging sounds, the heavy footprints, the deliberate watching. I realized I had narrowly avoided running into someone dangerous, someone willing to lie in wait for anyone foolish enough to camp alone. I never returned to that forest. The memory still lingers. The tall figure standing in the shadows, the sound of dragging in the night, and the sheer isolation that made every step and every rustle feel like a threat. But I also learned something crucial that trip. The forest is not just peaceful and quiet. It is alive in ways we cannot always see, and sometimes the most terrifying things are not supernatural, they are human. From that day on, I always made sure someone knew where I was going when I camped. I stick to popular trails, carry extra supplies, and never, ever camp alone in remote areas without careful planning. That summer of 2019 taught me fear, vigilance, and respect in a way nothing else could. And even now, years later, whenever I hear a forest at night, I cannot forget the dragging footsteps and the figure that watched me from the shadows, patient and deliberate, waiting for the wrong moment. I drove into the northern part of Wyoming in the fall of 2019, a few weeks after my 29th birthday. I had been planning a small solo hunting trip for months. Work had been crushing me down to the point where even silence felt loud, and I just wanted a few days of cold air, empty land, and no responsibilities. The weather was supposed to be dry, and the forest roads in that region were known for being quiet but not completely abandoned. Felt like the right place to clear my head. I reached the trailhead late in the afternoon and spent the first hour hiking into the woods. The trees were tall and spaced just enough to let strips of sunlight fall onto the ground. Every few feet, the leaves made a soft crunch under my boots. The air felt thin and sharp, and each breath carried the smell of pine and dirt. The closest town was over an hour away by car, and I liked that distance. I set up camp in a small clearing near a narrow creek, just a basic spot with enough room for my tent, my pack, and a small fire. I spent the first evening preparing everything for the next morning. I sharpened my knife, checked my rifle twice, sorted my food, and made sure my tent stakes were deep. I wanted everything perfect before night dropped. When the sun finally slipped behind the trees, the temperature fell fast. The fire became the only warm thing in sight. I sat there for a long time just listening to the creek, letting the crackling of the fire mix with the soft sound of running water. It felt peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in months. That first night passed without anything unusual, but I still woke up several times. Not from fear, just from the cold. The kind of cold that makes your fingers stiff even inside the sleeping bag. By sunrise, I was already moving. I followed a ridge line deeper into the forest, scanning the ground for tracks, listening for movement. I walked slowly and stopped often, the way I had been taught years ago. Most of the time, the only sounds came from the wind pushing through the branches above me. Around midday, I found several old deer tracks, but nothing fresh. I kept walking until the ridge dipped downward into darker, denser trees. That part of the forest felt different. The air seemed thicker, and the ground was softer under my boots. I didn't see much wildlife, which was strange because the place looked perfect for animals. Still, I pushed deeper, wanting at least one real chance before the day ended. At some point in the late afternoon, when the sun was already sliding lower, I found something that felt wrong right away. About 30 yards ahead, in a little pocket of trees, I spotted a dead deer. At first, I thought maybe another hunter had taken a shot and didn't recover the body, but when I got close, it didn't look like that at all. The deer was torn open across the stomach, but the cuts weren't clean. It looked messy, dragged, opened in a way that didn't match a normal predator kill. The legs were twisted, and the body looked like it had been moved several times. I crouched down beside it and studied the ground. The dirt around the deer had prints, but they overlapped so strangely that I couldn't identify any clearly. They looked almost like boot prints, but with odd spacing and dragging marks mixed in. Something had been here, something bigger than a normal animal, or at least something that didn't move the way a normal animal should. I stayed there for too long, trying to understand what I was looking at. Eventually, the light dropped enough that I realized I had made a mistake by walking this far. I headed back faster than I should have, almost jogging through the trees. The forest felt heavier as it darkened, and every sound seemed sharper. A single crack of a branch in the distance made my chest tighten. I didn't see anything following me, but the feeling that something else was out there grew with every minute. I reached camp just as the last light faded. I didn't even bother cooking much. I ate something cold and small, then stared at the darkness between the trees for longer than I'd admit. I told myself it was just the long day making me paranoid, but the image of that twisted deer stayed with me. I finally crawled into my tent and shut the zipper slowly, almost as if noise alone would draw attention. Sleep came in short pieces. Every few minutes I woke up. Sometimes I heard nothing. Sometimes I heard something so small that I convinced myself it was just branches settling. But then, deep in the night, I woke to a sound that made my stomach sink. A slow, steady crunch of leaves, moving close to my campsite. Not rushing, not stumbling, just walking. It came from the direction of the creek. Each step sounded like someone putting weight down carefully, trying not to make noise but failing because the forest floor was covered in dry leaves. I lay there inside my sleeping bag, muscles tight, breathing shallow. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. There were no voices, no snorting animal breaths. Nothing except those deliberate steps circling close but never coming right up to the tent. I reached for my rifle, keeping my movements as quiet as I could. The steps moved again, this time farther away, then closer, then farther, like whatever it was kept changing its mind. Minutes dragged by, maybe an hour. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't dare. The only thing I could do was listen. Eventually, the steps faded into the distance. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, gripping the rifle until my hand went numb. Every sound made me flinch. The night seemed endless, but the sky finally turned gray, and I stepped out of the tent with stiff legs and burning eyes. There were tracks in the dirt, and finally I could see them clearly. They were boot prints, large, heavy, but the stride was strange, the spacing far apart, and the direction kept looping around my camp as if the person had circled me multiple times. The prints came from the woods, moved near the creek, approached my tent, backed away, then circled again. There were too many loops to count. Whoever it was had been out there a long time. That was enough for me. I packed fast, throwing gear into my pack without caring about order. The forest felt wrong, like it had watched me all night. The walk back to the trailhead felt twice as long, and every so often I looked over my shoulder even though the trees were still and silent. When I reached my truck, I felt something close to relief but not fully. I opened the door, tossed my pack inside, and turned the engine over. Before I pulled away, I looked once more at the trailhead, at the tall trees and the narrow opening that led back into the forest. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if exhaustion had twisted basic sounds into fear. But then I saw them, fresh boot prints near the start of the trail, prints that hadn't been there when I arrived the day before. They faced toward my camp, not away from it. Someone had gone in after me. I didn't wait to think. I backed the truck out fast, drove down the dirt road until the forest thinned, and didn't stop until I reached the highway. Even then, the unease stayed. I kept checking my mirror, even though I knew no one was behind me. In the weeks that followed, I replayed the sounds, the tracks, the dead deer, the strange circling steps. I tried to explain it to myself in simple ways. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe someone living out there illegally, maybe just a person who didn't want to be seen. But the way the prints circled so many times, the way the steps moved slow and careful around my tent, the way the deer had been torn and dragged, none of it added up to something harmless. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still love the woods, but I won't sleep out there by myself anymore. Not after feeling someone walk around me in the dark. Someone who didn't speak, didn't reveal themselves, didn't leave a note or a warning. Someone who watched for hours and then disappeared before sunrise. The forest is still beautiful, but I learned something on that trip that I won't forget. The scariest thing out there isn't an animal or a ghost. It's another person who doesn't want you to know they're there. And I'm certain now, I wasn't alone in those woods, not even for a minute. I was 29, and in the spring of 2018, I decided to take a solo camping trip deep in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. I had been planning it for months, wanting nothing but solitude, fresh air, and some time to clear my head after a messy year of work and failed relationships. I picked a small, almost forgotten trail near Mount Carrigain, where maps barely marked any camping spots and cell service was practically non-existent. I wanted isolation, and I was getting exactly that. The first day was perfect. I hiked with a light pack, enjoying the scent of pine and damp earth after an early morning drizzle. By mid-afternoon, I had found a flat clearing near a small creek that trickled quietly through the forest. The ground was soft but not muddy, and a few large rocks made natural seats. It felt like my own secret little world. I set up my tent, a lightweight two-person model even though I was alone, and arranged my gear neatly inside. The sky was cloudy but bright enough that I didn't worry about rain yet. I spent the rest of the day exploring the surrounding forest, snapping pictures of moss-covered trees and the occasional deer tracks in the mud. By sundown, I returned to my site, made a small fire, and cooked a simple meal of beans and sausages. Around 9 in the evening, the rain started. At first, it was light, a gentle tapping on the tent fabric. But within an hour, it turned into a relentless downpour. The wind picked up, making the trees sway and groan ominously. The creek beside me had started to rise, the water turning murky and moving faster. I felt a familiar mix of anxiety and thrill. There's something about being alone in the wilderness during a storm that makes your senses sharper, your mind racing. I laid on my sleeping pad, listening to the rain hammering the tent, feeling the occasional gust of wind make the tent walls ripple against my face. Around midnight, I noticed something strange. The rain was heavy enough that visibility outside the tent was almost zero, but I swore I could hear something moving through the underbrush, a soft crunching of wet leaves and broken twigs. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a deer or some other animal, but the rhythm didn't match anything natural I'd heard before. It was deliberate, slow, almost cautious, like someone was stepping carefully but intentionally. My stomach nodded. I stayed still, holding my breath, listening. The sound grew closer. My mind raced, thinking about every possible scenario. The only other people for miles were probably hikers or campers, but who would be out there in this rain at midnight? I had no cell signal, and the nearest ranger station was over an hour away by foot. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out through the small triangular tent flap. At first, I saw nothing, just a blur of wet trees and thick darkness. But then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, wearing a soaked dark jacket and a hood that hid his face. He was standing about 20 feet from my tent, looking in my direction, completely still. My heart froze. I couldn't see his features, but there was something about the way he stood that set every instinct on edge. I thought about making noise, but the wind and rain would drown it out. He didn't move again. He just stood there, watching. I remembered the survival advice I had read countless times. Don't panic, make a plan. I quietly reached for the small survival knife I always carried in my pocket and tucked it into my hand. The man shifted slightly, but didn't come closer. Every second felt like an hour. Then, without warning, he turned and disappeared into the trees. I didn't hear him leave, but the sound of movement gradually faded. I stayed in the tent, tense and alert, listening to the rain, my mind racing with fear and disbelief. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every rustle of leaves, every gust of wind, made me jump. I checked the tent multiple times, making sure the zipper was tight, and kept my knife close. The storm continued, unrelenting, and the creek beside me was now dangerously swollen. By dawn, the rain slowed to a drizzle, but the forest around me felt alien. The once familiar clearing seemed different, almost menacing in the gray morning light. I packed my gear quickly, careful not to leave anything behind, and began hiking back to the main trail. As I made my way through the wet forest, I kept thinking about the figure. I had seen him, no doubt about it, and I couldn't understand why he had been there. Maybe he was a local who didn't expect to see anyone. Maybe he had been lost. Maybe I didn't want to consider the worst. My pace quickened when I heard something snap behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. My boots squelched in the mud, the rain still dripping from the pine branches above. After what felt like hours but was probably 30 minutes, I finally saw the trailhead. A few early hikers passed me, curious glances thrown my way, and I didn't care. By the time I got to my car, soaked and exhausted, I felt a wave of relief I can't describe. The city lights in the distance seemed impossibly bright and safe. I locked the doors, sat inside, and just breathed. I called the local ranger station and reported what I had seen, giving as much detail as I could. They told me they had received occasional reports of people in the area, mostly hikers and a few campers, but no one matching the description I gave. They warned me to stay safe and never go back alone to that part of the forest. Driving home, I kept replaying the night over and over. The fear, the tension, the rain, the figure standing so still. It all felt like something from a nightmare. But what made it real was the fact that there was no fantastical element, no ghost or monster, just the raw, primal fear of being completely alone and vulnerable in the wilderness, with someone or something watching. That night changed the way I approached the outdoors. I still camp and hike, but I never go alone anymore, especially in remote areas. I learned to respect the forest in a new way, to trust my instincts, and to always be prepared for the unexpected. The man in the rain never returned, and I never found out who he was or why he had been there. But the memory stays with me. Clear, vivid, and unsettling. A reminder that sometimes the scariest moments are grounded in reality, not imagination. And while the experience was terrifying, it ended with a lesson. Vigilance, preparation, and respect for nature, and for other people, can be the difference between a night of fear and a night of disaster. I survived, and I came away with a story that no one will ever fully understand unless they've been there, alone, in the middle of a storm, and felt the weight of another presence watching from the dark. It was the summer of 2018, and I had just turned 22. I had been craving a real break from everything, so I decided to go camping in the northern woods of Michigan, somewhere deep enough that I could be alone, but close enough to the main road in case something went wrong. I had packed my old, reliable tent, a small sleeping bag, a portable stove, and enough food and water to last a few days. I had been camping before, but never alone this far into the forest. I arrived at the trailhead late in the afternoon, just as the sun was starting to dip behind the dense line of pines. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, a smell that always made me feel both calm and slightly uneasy at the same time. I started hiking, following a small dirt path that led deeper into the forest. The trail was narrow, and the farther I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. Birds were chirping, the occasional squirrel darted across the trail, and the wind rustled through the leaves in a way that made it feel alive. After about 2 hours, I found a clearing that seemed perfect. It had a small stream running nearby and enough flat ground to pitch my tent. I set up camp, arranging my supplies neatly, and built a small fire. I sat there for a while, just listening to the forest. It was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural, like the world had been paused and I was the only one moving. As night fell, I crawled into my tent, the sounds of the forest growing sharper and stranger in the darkness. The stream babbled softly, but other noises, snapping branches, rustling leaves, made me tense up. I tried to tell myself it was just animals, deer or raccoons, maybe even coyotes moving around. But something about the way the sounds shifted, as if they were moving around me rather than along the trail, made me uneasy. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of heavy breathing. First, I thought it was mine, but it wasn't. It was low, measured, and definitely coming from outside. I froze, my heart hammering. I had a small flashlight, but I didn't want to leave the safety of my tent to see what it was. The breathing stopped and started again after a few minutes, this time accompanied by a low, scratching sound, like claws on wood or rocks. I told myself it was a bear, but the pattern didn't feel right. Bears don't breathe like that, and they don't scratch just to listen. I stayed still for what felt like hours, every sound amplified in the pitch-dark night. Eventually, I convinced myself it must have moved on. I didn't sleep much after that, staying alert and listening to the forest's every whisper. At some point, I heard footsteps on the trail leading to my clearing. They weren't slow and heavy like a deer or a bear. They were calculated, soft, and cautious, as if whoever it was trying not to make noise but also trying to listen to me. Morning came reluctantly, the sun barely peeking through the dense trees. I ventured out of my tent slowly, trying to see if there were any signs of an animal or a person. Nothing obvious. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing that clearly showed what had been there. The fire had burned down to embers, and my campsite was otherwise undisturbed. I packed up quickly, feeling an urgency I couldn't explain, and started hiking back the way I had come. About an hour into the trail, I realized I had lost the path. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, trees all around that looked identical, every bend in the trail making me second-guess my direction. I had my map and compass, but something about the woods threw me off. I kept thinking I was going north when I was heading south. Panic started to creep in. The more I walked, the more I felt like I was being watched. Every time I turned my head, I thought I saw movement just out of the corner of my eye, always disappearing when I looked directly. I remembered I had my phone. I checked the signal. None. Great. I had brought a GPS device, but I had forgotten to charge it fully, and it had less than 20% battery left. I cursed myself silently, trying to think. My plan had always been simple. Follow the trail back to the car, drive home, and never think about this again. But now, alone in the forest with shadows stretching unnaturally between the trees, I felt something I had never felt before. True fear, not of animals or weather, but of another human being. The forest went on for what felt like hours. I tried to mark my path, breaking branches or leaving small piles of rocks, but every time I thought I recognized a landmark, it didn't match anything I remembered. By mid-afternoon, exhaustion hit. My backpack was heavy, my legs were sore, and the constant feeling of being watched had my nerves raw. Then I saw it. A figure standing between two trees, partially hidden in shadow. At first, I thought it was a deer, but it didn't move like one. It was upright, still watching me. My heart stopped. I crouched behind a tree, trying not to make a sound. It didn't move. Then, slowly, it turned and walked away. I waited for what felt like an eternity before I dared to move. I kept moving carefully, trying to stay off the main trail. I remembered something from a survival article I had read. If you feel unsafe and alone, keep moving toward water. Streams usually lead to larger rivers or roads. I followed the sound of a distant stream, moving quietly, avoiding open spaces as much as possible. Eventually, I found it. A small creek, the water rushing over rocks. Relief washed over me. I followed it downstream, praying it would lead to civilization. Hours later, as the sun started to dip again, I saw a faint trail in the distance. It looked like it had been walked on, maybe by hikers or locals. I ran toward it, calling out every so often. Finally, after what felt like days, I reached a dirt road. My car wasn't far. When I got there, I locked the doors immediately, my hands shaking, and drove straight to the nearest town. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station. I bought water, food, and finally called a friend to come pick me up. I never went back to that forest. Looking back, I don't know if anyone was really following me or if my mind was playing tricks after hours of fear and exhaustion. But something about that night, the way the forest seemed alive, the way I felt eyes on me when there shouldn't have been anyone, stayed with me. I still go camping sometimes, but I stick to places with other people nearby, where the quiet of nature is comforting, not threatening. That experience taught me something I didn't expect. The forest isn't dangerous because of animals or storms. It's dangerous because it can make you doubt your own senses, make you feel exposed and alone in a way that cuts deeper than any physical threat. And sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see, it's what you don't. It was the summer of 2018, and I had decided to take a solo camping trip in the Austrian Alps. I was 27 at the time, and though I had been camping before, I usually stuck to more populated spots. This time, I wanted isolation, the kind of solitude that lets you breathe without hearing another human for miles. I had my old, beaten-up backpack, a tent that had survived more than a few storms, a small stove, and a notebook. I drove from Vienna in my old VW Golf, following narrow mountain roads that twisted endlessly. By late afternoon, I had parked near a small, almost hidden trailhead that led up into the hills. The sun was dropping behind the peaks when I reached a small clearing I thought would be perfect for my tent. A brook trickled nearby, surrounded by clusters of pine trees, and the air smelled clean, almost sharp with the scent of damp moss and pine needles. I set up my tent carefully, checking each peg and guy lines, making sure it would hold if the wind picked up overnight. As I worked, I noticed a thin figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just at the tree line. At first, I thought it was a hiker passing through, but something about him didn't feel right. He was tall and oddly thin, his clothes dark and hanging loose, almost blending into the shadows of the trees. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I had the sinking feeling he was staring at me. I forced myself to focus on my tent, telling myself I was being paranoid. People hike alone all the time. Once my tent was up, I cooked a small meal on my stove and sat on a flat rock by the brook, listening to the water and the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. The sun disappeared completely, leaving the forest in a dim twilight. That's when I noticed him again. He was closer this time, maybe 30 or 40 meters away, just standing perfectly still, watching. I froze. I thought about calling the police, but my phone barely had a signal, and I didn't want to attract attention if I didn't need to. I packed up my cooking gear quietly and crawled into my tent, pretending I was asleep. I kept my small flashlight and a folding knife within reach. The forest around me was alive with the usual night sounds: the rustling of leaves, the croak of frogs, the occasional snap of a branch under the weight of an animal. But there was another sound too, subtle but unmistakable: the soft crunch of footsteps on the forest floor. They weren't random. They were deliberate, circling around the clearing, pausing, then moving again. My heart pounded, and I kept my eyes on the tent's small mesh window, trying to see without being seen. Hours passed like that. The footsteps would approach and retreat, sometimes lingering so close I thought he was right outside the tent. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe too loudly. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me. Every gust of wind through the pines sounded like someone whispering my name. I didn't sleep at all. When the first light of dawn crept into the tent, I finally unzipped it slowly, peering out. The man was gone, or at least I couldn't see him. The clearing looked normal, quiet, as if nothing had happened. My legs were shaking, my mouth dry. I packed everything as quickly as I could, deciding to hike back down to the main road. I stayed alert, scanning every tree line and rock formation, but the forest seemed empty. I didn't see him again that morning. By the time I reached the road, I felt a small sense of relief, though it didn't last long. A local gas station had a board listing missing hikers, and as I glanced at it, a chill ran down my spine. 2 hikers had disappeared in that exact area just months before, and another report mentioned a strange man seen near campsites. I didn't linger. I filled my tank, bought a bottle of water, and drove straight back to Vienna, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they were sore by the time I got home. Weeks later, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been followed. I kept replaying that night over and over, the way he moved, the way he watched, the silence he carried with him. Then I saw it in the news. A man was arrested in Upper Austria, living alone in a cabin in the forest. Authorities found evidence of break-ins, stolen supplies, and disturbing items that suggested he had been watching campers for months, maybe years. I couldn't confirm it, but the description matched perfectly. I started to think about what would have happened if I had left my tent at night or if he had decided to get closer. The thought was enough to keep me from sleeping with the lights off for days. I realized that the world could be terrifying even without ghosts, even without legends. Real people, real threats were far more frightening. After that, I avoided remote camping trips. I stuck to crowded parks, national campgrounds, anywhere people were likely to be around. I told a few close friends about the experience, though not all the details. Some didn't believe me. Some thought I was overreacting. But I knew what I had felt that night. The kind of fear that comes from knowing someone is silently observing you, waiting. Years later, I returned to the same general area, but I never camped there again. I hiked during the day, always keeping the trail visible, always within reach of the road. I brought a GPS, a bear spray, and a new sense of caution. Even then, the memory lingered. The crunch of footsteps, the weight of his gaze, the darkness that wasn't natural. Looking back, I realized how lucky I was. Luck, timing, And maybe the fact that I had stayed calm enough to avoid confrontation probably saved me. That night in Austria taught me that fear is not just about what we imagine. It's about the instinctual understanding that some people have intentions we cannot predict, that danger can be silent, patient, and terrifyingly real. Even now, when I hear a branch snap behind me while hiking or see a figure in the distance that seems out of place, I can't help but remember that night. I remember the man who watched me from the shadows, whose silence screamed louder than any threat, and I am grateful for the stark clarity it gave me. The wilderness is beautiful, but it is not forgiving, and it hides its dangers in ways we rarely expect. I never returned to solo camping in the Alps, but I never completely gave up hiking. I learned to respect both the beauty and the danger of isolation. And sometimes, when I drive past those narrow mountain roads or glimpse a quiet clearing, I remind myself of how fragile safety can be, and how deeply awareness and caution can protect you when luck isn't enough. I chose to camp alone in late September of 2019, right before the cold really started to settle in. I had been feeling tired from work and wanted a break from screens, noise, and people. I drove out to a quiet part of northern Colorado, near an area of forest that wasn't popular with tourists. The air felt sharp and clean when I stepped out of my car, and the sky looked like it had been washed only a few hours earlier. I liked the idea of being completely alone. At the time, I saw it as peaceful. Later, I would think of that same silence in a very different way. I hiked for maybe an hour before choosing a flat spot near a small stream. The water made a soft, rushing sound that repeated over and over, almost like breathing, steady and calm. I set up my tent, spread out my sleeping bag, arranged my food, and made a small fire just to warm myself while I worked. The ground was covered in fallen pine needles and dry leaves that stuck to everything. Even my boots were lined with them by the end. For most of the afternoon, everything felt normal. I walked around the area, collected firewood, checked the stream to see if the water was clean, and watched tiny insects crawl across rocks like nothing in the world could interrupt their tiny routines. I kept telling myself how good it felt to be away from everything. It was one of those quiet days where time feels slower than usual. But around sunset, something shifted. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just a feeling. The forest didn't exactly get darker. Sunset always brings that. But the atmosphere felt heavier. The air didn't move. No wind, no rustling branches, no distant animal calls. Just that constant stream noise, but even that sounded too steady, like it was tuned down to a lower volume. I kept glancing around without any clear reason. My eyes wanted something to focus on, but there was nothing. I brushed it off and made myself food, then sat near the fire until the sky turned fully black. Once the heat started dropping hard, I finally got inside my tent and zipped it shut. The nylon walls trapped warmth quickly, and I felt safer in the small space. But even inside, the strange mood outside stayed with me. Usually, when I camp, I can hear something: crickets, distant cracking branches, maybe the sound of an animal somewhere far off. That night felt like someone had taken a thick blanket and wrapped the entire forest under it. Too quiet, too still. Sometime in the night, maybe around 1 a.m., I woke up for no reason. My mind felt clear, not groggy. That bothered me. I usually need noise to sleep, even soft noise, and the quiet pressed down on me until my heart beat faster than it should have for someone lying down. That was when I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, just a single slow step on the dry ground. Dry leaves crushing under weight, not falling naturally from a branch. I held my breath, listening so hard that it almost hurt. Another step, then another. Slow, steady, moving in a curved path around my camp. My tent walls were thin, and the moonlight was weak, but I could see a faint shadow pass across the side of the fabric. The shape stretched tall and narrow, like someone standing upright. My breathing slowed out of pure instinct. My hands went cold. I kept my entire body still so nothing inside the tent would shift or make noise. The steps circled a little more, all at the same slow pace. Leaves moved beneath whatever was out there. Pine needles crushed. The sound wasn't like an animal. Animals were either fast and skittish or heavy and purposeful. This was too controlled. Whoever it was took steps with clear intention. After a few minutes, the footsteps stopped. The silence returned. Total silence, like the forest was waiting. I stayed awake for hours after that, frozen in place. My back ached, my legs tingled, and my jaw was tight from clenching. But I didn't dare move. At some point near dawn, I heard birds again. The forest finally sounded alive. The light outside the tent turned from black to gray, then to a pale early morning blue. Only then did I unzip the tent just a little and peek out. At first glance, everything looked the same. My small fire pit, the stream, the trees. Nothing stood out. But then I noticed the ground around the backside of my tent. Someone had walked in a half circle around it. The prints were clear where the leaves had been crushed into the dirt. They weren't small, maybe men's-sized boots, but the part that hit me hardest was how close they got. The steps came within a few feet of where my head had been lying inside the tent. I tried to convince myself maybe it had been a ranger, someone checking the area. But the region wasn't a patrolled campground, and the prints didn't look like heavy work boots. They looked like regular hiking boots. Someone normal. Someone who should have had no reason to walk silently around a tent at 1 in the morning. I spent the next hour debating whether to pack up right away or act like nothing happened. Part of me worried that if someone had been watching, rushing away would signal panic, and panic might make me look vulnerable. The other part of me couldn't stand the idea of staying any longer. I kept glancing at the tree line, trying to see if anyone was there. I decided to leave, but I tried to do it slowly, like someone who simply woke up early. I broke down the tent, rolled up my sleeping bag, washed my face in the stream, and loaded everything back into my backpack. My hands shook the whole time, but I tried to keep my movements steady. When I finally started hiking back toward where I'd parked, I kept looking behind me every few minutes. The trees all looked the same, but every now and then I felt something unnatural in the air again, like I was being watched. I walked faster but kept my steps quiet without meaning to. I didn't even notice I was doing it. Near the halfway point, the trail twisted between two tall rocks. The space between them was narrow, only wide enough for one person. As I stepped through, I saw something on the ground, fresh boot prints going the same direction I had come from. Same size as the ones near my tent. Same pattern. Someone had been ahead of me at some point. Someone who had walked toward my camp sometime before or after circling it. My chest tightened. I didn't know if the prints were from last night or early that morning, but they were fresh, too fresh to ignore. I pushed through the rest of the hike, never stopping, barely breathing. My throat was dry and my legs burned, but I didn't slow down. By the time I reached my car, my shirt was stuck to my back from sweat, even though the morning was cold. I threw my gear in the back seat without caring how messy it looked. As I closed the door, I scanned the tree line one last time. That same heavy silence from the night before settled around the area again for a moment, like the forest recognized me leaving. Then a slight breeze broke the stillness. I drove away as fast as I safely could, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds. Nothing followed. No one stepped out onto the road. No cars appeared behind me. But I didn't feel calm until I reached the highway, miles away from the trail. For days after the trip, I replayed the night in my head. The slow steps, the shadow, the prints. There was no reason for anyone to be out there at that hour, circling a stranger's tent in silence. No reason to track the same trail before or after I passed through. The strange part is that nothing actually happened. No attack, no confrontation, no voice. But sometimes the things that almost happen leave a deeper mark. Knowing someone was out there, moving with such control, staying so close without making a sound, felt worse than anything else. In the end, I understood something very clearly. Real danger doesn't always show itself directly. Sometimes it just watches, waits, and walks away before you ever see its face. And that unknown, that silent presence, is what stays with you long after you're safely home. I still camp sometimes, but never alone anymore. And every night when I zip up my tent, I listen carefully to the sounds around me. As long as I can hear the wind, insects, or the rush of water, I feel grounded. But the moment the world goes quiet in that unnatural way, I remember that night, and I know exactly what that kind of silence means. I remember it like it was yesterday, even though it was already the summer of 2017. I had been itching for a break from the city, so I packed up my old Subaru and headed for the northern part of Vermont, somewhere deep in the Green Mountains. I was 28 at the time, and my golden retriever, Max, had been my companion for nearly 8 years. He wasn't just a dog. He was a shadow that followed me everywhere, and I trusted him with my life. I found a small clearing off a dirt road that seemed almost hidden from the main path. The area wasn't marked on the map I had, which I liked. It meant fewer people. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and fallen branches, and a thin stream ran nearby, reflecting the late afternoon sun. The forest around was dense, trees stretching tall and close, their leaves thick enough to make the shadows stretch unnaturally even in daylight. I parked the car and let Max out, watching him bound over the underbrush like a golden streak. I set up my tent first, choosing a spot where the ground was firm, but not too close to the stream. Max stayed close, sniffing around, his ears perked for any sign of wildlife. I unpacked my gear and built a small fire pit with stones I found scattered around. As the sun sank lower, I gathered some firewood, noting how quiet it was. There were no cars, no voices, just the occasional rustle of leaves or bird calls. First, it was peaceful. By the time I started cooking dinner, the sky had turned a deep orange, the kind that makes everything look unreal. Max lay nearby, half in the sun, half in the shadow of the trees, his tail wagging lazily. I kept glancing around, half expecting someone to appear from the trees, but there was nothing. Dinner went quietly, and after eating, I washed up in the stream. The water was cold but refreshing. Max drank greedily, shaking the droplets off his fur, sending a fine mist into the air. Night came fast. The forest transformed into something entirely different. Sounds I had ignored during the day became eerie. The wind through the branches sounded like whispers, and distant animals made sharp, sudden noises that made me jump. Max, normally calm, began growling low in his throat, ears pinned back, hackles raised. I followed his gaze into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything at first. Then I noticed movement, something sliding silently between the trees, just at the edge of my flashlight's reach. I tried to convince myself it was a deer or a fox, but the way it moved, careful, deliberate, almost human in its pauses, made my stomach knot. I crouched near the fire, Max at my side, keeping my small lantern lit. Every now and then, I'd see a flicker of shadow, always just at the edge of my vision. My mind raced through possibilities. Hunters, lost hikers, or worse, but I couldn't hear voices. There was no sound except the occasional snap of a branch, but even that seemed timed, deliberate. Around midnight, Max's growling intensified. He suddenly bolted to the edge of the clearing, barking furiously. I grabbed my flashlight and followed, heart pounding. I shone the beam into the darkness, but again, I saw nothing. The noise from Max seemed to attract whatever it was. I felt rather than saw movement, a large, dark shape shifting behind the trees. My first instinct was to grab him and run, but Max refused to leave, barking and growling, his body tense. I decided to go back to the tent, thinking maybe whatever it was would go away. Max stayed close, circling the perimeter of the campsite. I tried to settle, but sleep was impossible. Every snap, every rustle made my heart jump. I kept the fire burning high, knowing that light and warmth were my only barriers against the dark. Hours passed like that. Eventually, I dozed intermittently, only to wake again at strange intervals, always to the feeling of being watched. Then, around 3 a.m., I heard it clearly. Not the rustling of leaves, not a branch snapping. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching over twigs and leaves. They weren't close yet, but they were getting closer. I froze, Max growling low and rumbling, a warning. I gripped my hunting knife, wishing I had brought my gun. The footsteps stopped abruptly, just beyond the firelight. I could see nothing, but I could feel it, the presence, heavy and deliberate, just outside the glow. I whispered for Max to stay, though I knew he wouldn't leave my side. The silence stretched unbearably long. Then the footsteps moved again, circling the tent, slow, careful, deliberate. Max barked sharply and ran to the edge of the firelight, but I held him back. Whatever it was, it didn't want to reveal itself fully. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. I realized then that I was completely alone with this unknown entity, with nothing but a small fire and my instincts to protect me. I decided I couldn't stay. I waited until I thought it had moved away slightly, then grabbed my backpack, slipped on my boots, and prepared to make a run for the car. Max followed instantly, sticking close. I moved slowly at first, testing the ground, listening to every sound. I caught glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the trees, always keeping pace with me, but never stepping fully into the light. I ran when I thought I could, Max at my side, the firelight shrinking behind me. It took nearly half an hour to reach the car, through uneven ground, over fallen logs, past the stream, through underbrush that clawed at my arms and legs. I didn't stop running until the Subaru was in sight. I slammed the door shut, Max jumping inside immediately, ears pinned back and body trembling. I locked the doors and started the engine, the rumble echoing through the trees. I drove slowly at first, then faster, trying to shake the feeling of eyes watching me from every darkened corner. When I finally reached the main road, the lights from passing cars felt like a revelation. I didn't stop until I was out of the mountains entirely, back on familiar highways. Max lay quietly beside me, exhausted but alert. I didn't speak, words felt useless. The fear had etched itself into me, a memory that wouldn't fade. The next day, I called the local ranger station, asking about the area I had camped in. They told me it was rarely used, and sometimes people reported sightings of illegal hunters or poachers, people who lurked in the forest waiting for trespassers. They cautioned me never to camp there alone again. Even now, years later, I remember every detail. The shape of the clearing, the way the trees leaned, the sound of twigs breaking under invisible footsteps, Max's growl, the cold air thick with tension. Camping had always been my escape, my solace. But that night reminded me that the wilderness, though beautiful, can hold dangers you can't see until it's almost too late. Max and I survived, and we came back stronger, more careful and wary. But I'll never forget how real fear can feel when the forest itself seems alive, watching you, waiting. From that day on, I never went into unknown woods alone. Max still accompanies me on every trip, a silent guardian. And every time I set up a campfire, I remember that night, the shadow just at the edge of the light, and the way the world felt too large, too quiet, and dangerously close to something I wasn't ready to face. I drove out to a quiet farming area in southern Illinois in the late summer of 2019. I was 24 then, restless and tired of the noise of the city, and I wanted a place where I could breathe for a few days. A coworker had told me about an old family-owned farm that allowed people to camp on the far side of their land. The farm was mostly corn and soy fields with a few wooded patches on the edges. It sounded perfect for a weekend alone, and I didn't overthink anything. I just packed my tent, some cheap camping gear, and a cooler with food, then left early in the morning. By the time I reached the long dirt road leading to the farm, the sun was already burning in the sky. Dust rose behind my car as I drove slowly across the uneven road. The main house looked old but well-kept, with white paint that was peeling near the bottom edges and a tin roof that glimmered in the sunlight. Behind it were large barns, tall silos, and big farming machines parked in crooked positions that made them look abandoned even though they probably still worked. Someone had placed a small wooden sign near the side of the driveway, pointing to the camping area about a mile out behind the last row of crops. The land felt wide and empty in a strange way. Even though I could see endless fields stretching across the distance, it didn't feel peaceful the way I expected. It felt too open, too quiet, like the silence had weight. But I ignored that feeling, thinking it was just the difference between the city and the countryside. The camping area was nothing more than a patch of rough grass beside a weathered line of pine trees. Behind the trees, the fields dropped into a wide stretch of tall corn that moved in slow waves whenever the wind blew. There was an old shed beside the pines, leaning forward as if it might fall any second. Its faded red paint and sagging roof made it look like no one had touched it for years. I parked a little distance away from it and set up my tent near the edge of the trees so I could get some shade. The air smelled like earth and dry corn leaves. Bugs buzzed lazily around my arms. Sweat collected on my neck as I hammered the tent stakes into the ground. Everything around me felt calm but empty, like the world had been paused. After I set up, I walked around the edge of the trees. The dirt was soft and uneven. Old footprints and tire tracks from tractors ran in different directions, some of them half erased by rain and time. The shed door was half open, and even from a distance I could see the darkness inside. Something about that shed made the back of my neck tighten, but I didn't want to act paranoid over nothing, so I turned away and went back to my tent. The afternoon passed slowly. I ate a sandwich, drank warm water from a bottle, and lay on my sleeping bag as the heat filled the tent. I could hear the wind brushing through the corn and the distant hum of insects. Once in a while, I thought I heard something else, something that didn't belong, short, sharp sounds like quick steps on dry grass. Every time I sat up and listened closely, everything turned silent again. The longer I stayed, the more I felt like someone else was nearby, but the fields were empty every time I checked. By evening, the sky turned orange and the heat slowly faded. I built a small fire in a ring of stones someone had made before me. I sat on the ground watching the flames crackle, the smoke twisting into the air. The shadows around the trees grew darker, and the shed looked even more out of place as the last bit of daylight slipped away. I tried to enjoy the calm, but the quietness felt unnatural. Even the insects seemed less active than earlier. As night settled fully across the fields, the barn lights in the distance were the only signs of life. Everything else fell into a heavy darkness. I went into the tent, zipped it closed, and lay down. The fabric walls moved slightly with each gust of wind. I stared at the ceiling, trying to relax, but my mind kept drifting back to the shed and those strange, quick noises from earlier. I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that farms have animals, raccoons, stray dogs, plenty of things that wander around at night. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again. I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep, but something felt different. The air in the tent felt colder. The wind outside was gone. Everything was too still. As I lay there, I heard a soft crunch outside, like a shoe pressing down on dry grass. Then another one, slow and spaced out. Someone was walking around my campsite. I held my breath and listened. The steps moved around the side of the tent, slow and careful. I could hear the faint sound of breathing, not mine, something steady and close. My chest felt tight, and all I could do was stay still. The footsteps stopped right outside, only a few feet from my head. The tent walls were too thin, and I felt exposed, like nothing was separating me from whoever was out there. After a long moment, the steps moved again, this time toward the trees. I heard the sound of something brushing against the pine branches. I stayed frozen for a full minute until the noise faded. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, but the steps were too slow, too heavy, too human. My thoughts raced, but I didn't dare move. I didn't sleep again that night. I just waited in silence, listening to the darkness. Every tiny sound felt like a threat. At one point, I thought I heard something shifting inside the shed, a dull creak like wood bending. Maybe I imagined it, maybe I didn't, but it kept me awake until the sky finally began to lighten hours later. When the sun rose, I left the tent immediately. The grass around my campsite had flattened marks leading away toward the shed. They were not from animals. They were controlled, even steps. My stomach twisted as I followed them with my eyes. The shed door, which had been half open the day before, was now wide open. The inside looked darker than before, like the shadows clung to the walls. I didn't go near it. I didn't want to know what or who had been inside. I packed my things as fast as I could. My hands shook while I rolled up the sleeping bag. The quiet morning didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the land was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. As I carried the last of my gear to the car, I felt a strong sense that someone was watching me. I didn't see anyone among the rows of corn or near the trees, but the feeling wouldn't leave my mind. When I finally started the engine, I didn't look back at the shed or the campsite. I just drove down the dirt road, faster than I probably should have. I didn't stop until I reached the main highway. Only then did my body slowly relax. The fields, the shed, the quiet steps in the night, they all felt far away, but the fear stayed in my chest. I knew what I heard. I knew the difference between an animal and a person. Someone had been walking around my tent, watching me while I slept in the middle of that empty farmland. I never went back to that farm. I didn't contact the owners or ask them if someone else had been out there. I didn't want to know. Sometimes I think about the shed and the wide open fields and how easy it would be for someone to hide out there without anyone noticing. I think about how close they came to my tent, how still the night became when they stood outside. The ending was simple for me. I got away. I left before anything worse could happen. But what stays with me is the knowledge that someone else was out there that night, moving slowly in the dark, silently watching me on that lonely patch of farmland. And the scariest part is knowing that if I hadn't woken up when I did, I might never have realized they were there at all. I had always loved the quiet of the wilderness. By 2017, I was 24, freshly out of college, and itching for a solo escape to clear my head. I picked a small national forest in northern Montana, nowhere near the popular trails, just miles of untouched trees and hidden lakes. I drove in late in the afternoon, my old pickup rattling over the dirt road, and parked near a narrow clearing where the underbrush had been cut back enough to pitch a tent. I had my usual gear: a tent, sleeping bag, backpack with food and water, a small cooking stove, and my flashlight, though I had a feeling I'd barely need it until night fully fell. Setting up camp was peaceful. The sun was low, streaking gold across the tall pine trees, their long shadows stretching across the ground. I stacked firewood I had gathered, arranging it neatly near the cleared fire pit. I decided to cook a simple meal: instant noodles, a can of beans, and some trail mix, while soaking in the silence. Occasionally, a bird would call, or a chipmunk would rustle through the leaves, but otherwise nothing moved. The kind of quiet that can make you feel small, but in a comforting way. Night fell quickly, earlier than I expected. By 8 p.m., the sky was a deep navy, sprinkled with stars so bright it felt like the forest itself was glowing. I sat by the fire, letting the heat chase away the chill that crept into my fingers. Around me, the trees loomed, black shapes against the night. Every now and then, I thought I saw shadows moving just beyond the firelight, but I chalked it up to my eyes adjusting and the wind shifting branches. Then I heard it, a snap. Not close, not alarmingly loud, but clear. Someone or something moving among the trees, and it didn't sound like an animal. Deer and elk made light, cautious steps. This snap was deliberate, heavy, and deliberate. My pulse quickened, but I told myself it was probably a hiker or another camper. I was in a remote area, yes, but not that remote. I tried to ignore it, but then the sound repeated, closer this time. Twigs cracking under deliberate, heavy footsteps, slow but unmistakably human. I felt a cold rush of fear. My mind raced through every warning I'd read about camping alone in Montana. Break-ins, attacks, people getting lost or hurt. I leaned forward slightly, straining to see through the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. And then I saw him, or at least a shape, dark, taller than me, standing just at the edge of the fire's glow. He didn't move at first, just watching. My stomach sank. He wasn't wearing anything bright, no reflective patches, just dark clothes blending into the night. I couldn't see a face, but the weight of his presence felt heavy, calculated. I had no plan for a situation like this. I wasn't carrying a gun, only a small pocket knife I used for cooking prep. The first thing I did was stay still. My instincts told me not to run, not to make noise, just to observe and see if he moved away. For what felt like 10 minutes, we stayed locked in that quiet stare, him barely visible in the shadows, and me sitting by my fire with every nerve screaming. Then he moved, slowly, and I noticed something odd. He wasn't just walking. He was circling, keeping just out of the firelight, testing the perimeter. I realized I was in his territory, not mine. My pulse thumped painfully in my ears. My mind raced through possibilities. Was he lost? Was he watching me for sport? Was he dangerous? I'd read enough reports to know that people who follow campers at night usually weren't friendly. I decided I had to make a move, but careful. I quietly unzipped my backpack and found my small can of bear spray. Not ideal against a human, but better than nothing. I crouched low, ready, listening to the leaves crunch softly under his feet as he circled. He paused suddenly, like he heard me moving. My stomach dropped. Then, without warning, he shifted. I couldn't see his face, but I felt his gaze move directly to me. My mind screamed, "Run," but instinct and fear held me frozen. And then I remembered my truck, the only escape route. I could make it there in under 30 seconds if I timed it right. I waited. My ears picked up his next step, the crack of a branch that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. He moved closer to the side of my fire, and I knew I had only one chance. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on, pointing the beam directly at him, and yelled as loudly as I could, hoping to startle him. The beam hit his face, and I finally saw him clearly. He was younger than I thought, maybe in his early 30s, scruffy, eyes wide. Not friendly, not playful, but calculating, like he was weighing me. He froze. My yell echoed through the trees. Then I ran, straight past the fire, straight into the shadows. He yelled something behind me, but I didn't look back. The adrenaline carried me over rocks, roots, and underbrush until I reached my truck. I fumbled with the keys, heart pounding in my ears so loud it felt like it would burst out of my chest. I finally got the door open, threw myself inside, locked it, and started the engine. The headlights pierced the darkness, and for a brief second, I thought I saw him standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me go. But when I blinked, he was gone. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station on the edge of the forest, nearly 20 miles away. My hands shook so badly I could barely fill my tank. I called the local ranger station, explained what happened, and they promised to check the area, though they couldn't guarantee anything that night. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and for weeks afterward, I couldn't shake the image of that man circling my campsite, the way he had moved silently among the trees, like he was part of the forest itself. I went back to camping later, but never alone, never without someone knowing exactly where I was. And I always kept a flashlight in my hand, ready to run. Looking back, I realized I had been lucky. I hadn't done anything overtly wrong. No bright lights, no loud noises, but being alone, unprepared for another human in the wilderness, had left me vulnerable. That night taught me more than any book or guide ever could. The forest isn't dangerous because of ghosts or wild animals. It's dangerous because it's unpredictable, and people can be just as unpredictable as the wilderness itself. Years later, I still drive that same stretch of forest road sometimes, but I never camp alone. I always leave an itinerary, carry extra gear, and trust my instincts. And I never forget the feeling of being watched, circling in the shadows, by someone who could have been just like me or far worse. I had been driving for almost 12 hours when I finally turned off the narrow highway and followed a dirt road that cut through the pine forest. It was late August of 2019, and I had taken a week off from work because I felt like I was burning out. I was 26 at the time, tired from long shifts, tired from staring at screens, tired of hearing people complain about things that didn't matter. I wanted silence, open space, and a place that didn't buzz with electricity every second. So I planned a solo camping trip across a few states, starting with a spot in northern Idaho that someone online had said was quiet, empty, and perfect for getting away. I should have known that anything described that way usually comes with a good reason behind the emptiness. The sun was dropping lower as I parked near a clearing surrounded by tall pines. There were no other cars, no campers, not even any old fire pits or signs that people used the area often. I liked that at first. The air was cold even though it was still summer, and it carried this sharp smell of pine needles and damp earth. I could hear nothing besides the distant sound of wind dragging itself through the treetops. After hours of radio noise and engine hum, the silence felt almost heavy. I set up my tent on a small patch of flat ground. The soil was soft, dark, and scattered with old needles. I kept thinking how untouched everything looked, almost like the place hadn't seen people in years. I walked around the clearing while there was still some light left, stretching my legs, trying to loosen up the stiffness in my back. I noticed that a thin trail continued past the clearing and disappeared into the trees. It looked barely used, but something about the uneven, narrow line made me feel uneasy. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just fatigue making me paranoid. When the sun finally slipped behind the tree line, the temperature dropped fast. I lit a small fire and cooked a quick meal, mostly to warm myself. The sky turned this deep navy blue, and stars began to spill across it. I thought I would enjoy the quiet, but there was something strange about that silence now. It felt like the forest was holding its breath. While I ate, I kept glancing toward the trail. I don't know why. My brain just kept returning to it. The deeper it got into the night, the more I felt like the trees were a wall and the darkness beyond them was thicker than any night I had camped in before. I tried to focus on the fire, on the simple crackling sound of wood breaking down into glowing dust, but it didn't help. When I finally put the fire out and crawled into my tent, I expected to fall asleep quickly from the long day of driving. Instead, I lay awake, listening. The ground felt cold beneath my sleeping pad. The darkness inside the tent was complete. Every sound outside seemed unnatural somehow. Small snaps, soft shuffles, distant creaks. I kept telling myself it was just animals. Nothing unusual for a forest in the middle of nowhere. But the longer I listened, the more I felt like the sounds weren't random movements. They came in bursts, then stopped completely, as if something was staying still for long stretches of time. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remembered was waking up suddenly in the dark. I didn't know what time it was, but the cold inside the tent was sharper than before. My breath felt thick in the air. The forest outside was silent again, but not the same silence as earlier. This time it felt like something heavy was sitting right outside the tent, not touching it, just existing there, blocking everything else out. My heart rate climbed fast. I tried to stay still and let my eyes adjust, even though I couldn't see anything. I had this strong sense that I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain it, but the feeling wasn't like the usual fear of being in a dark forest. It felt targeted, like the dark itself was aware of me. I slowly reached for my phone and checked the time. It was 3:14 a.m. No signal, of course. I turned the screen back off and listened harder. For a few minutes, there was absolutely nothing. No wind, no animals, not even distant rustling. Then I heard something faint, maybe 50 feet away, moving slowly through the undergrowth. It wasn't walking on four legs. The weight of each step was spaced differently, like something walking upright. The steps were inconsistent, slow, almost cautious. I could feel my chest tightening. I didn't know whether to unzip the tent and look or stay curled inside. Every instinct told me to stay hidden, but hiding inside a thin nylon shell felt pointless. The steps stopped. There was nothing again. Then a soft grinding sound came from the direction of the trail. It sounded like metal scraping against wood. Not fast, but long and steady, as if someone were dragging something. I swallowed hard, trying not to make a sound. I waited for the noise to continue, but after a few seconds, it stopped too. I lay there for what felt like hours, barely breathing. Eventually, exhaustion forced my eyes to close, even though my mind screamed not to fall asleep. When I woke up again, sunlight was filtering through the tent fabric, soft and pale. The forest was silent, but in a natural morning way now, not the dead stillness of the night. I stepped outside, shivering from the cold. The air smelled the same, but the clearing felt different, like the tension from the night had seeped into the ground. I checked around my campsite, looking for prints or signs of animals. The dirt near the trail was disturbed in several spots, but not in a way I could identify. It didn't look like paw marks, and it didn't look like boot tracks either. Just long smudged impressions, like someone had been dragging something heavy. I followed the marks for a few feet until they blended into the forest floor. The trail looked the same as always, thin and dark, leading deeper into the trees. I felt a sick feeling in my stomach just looking at it. During the day, it looked harmless enough, but after last night, it felt like the trail was hiding something behind its darkness. I didn't bother making breakfast. I packed my gear as fast as I could. My hands were shaking the whole time, and every few seconds I checked the tree line, expecting to see someone standing between the trunks. The fear from the night hadn't faded with the daylight. It had settled deeper, like something had watched me while I slept. When I finally got into my car and started driving back toward the highway, I felt like the forest was watching me leave. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone step out into the road. The hairs on my arms didn't ease down until I reached the main highway and saw another car for the first time in over a day. I didn't tell anyone exactly what happened. I just said the place made me uncomfortable and I left early. But the truth stayed with me. It wasn't the kind of fear that comes from seeing something dangerous. It was the kind that comes from not seeing it. The kind that sits in the back of your mind, reminding you that there are places where people don't go anymore for reasons that never make it into guidebooks. Places where the silence feels too deliberate, the trails too untouched, and the nights too long. Took me a long time to accept that nothing supernatural happened. Nothing impossible. What I heard out there was real. Someone was in those woods with me, moving slowly through the dark, dragging something along the ground. Someone who knew that place better than I did. Someone who stopped just close enough to listen to me inside my tent. To this day, the worst part isn't the sounds I heard. The worst part is the thought of what might have happened if I had unzipped the tent, even just an inch to look outside. I wasn't planning to camp that night. I had been driving since early morning through northern Oregon, following a route I found online that promised quiet forests and empty trails. I was 24 that year, and I liked the idea of being alone in the woods, far from noise and people. But by the time evening came, the sky had turned heavy and dark, and the rain started to fall in slow, thick drops that made the road feel smaller and more dangerous every mile. I didn't want to keep driving through the storm, and I didn't want to spend money on a motel either. So I took the next forest road and followed it into a patch of pine woods that looked mostly untouched. I found a flat spot not too far from the tree line. It was already muddy, but not enough to trap the car. I parked, grabbed my backpack, and started setting up my tent. The rain had become steady by then, the kind that soaked through your jacket no matter how new it was. My hands were cold and stiff, and the ground felt like wet sponge, but I pushed through because I just wanted shelter. When the tent was finally up, I crawled inside, changed into dry clothes, and listened to the storm build. There was no wind at first, just the rain hitting every surface, the tarp, the leaves, the dirt. The sound made everything outside feel distant, like I had dropped into a world that wasn't connected to anything else. I felt calm for a while. I ate something simple, stretched out on my sleeping bag, and tried to relax. But I kept hearing small noises outside the tent, tiny shifts in the wet ground, faint cracks in the brush. At first I thought it was the usual forest animals moving around, but the longer I lay there, the more I noticed a strange pattern. The sounds came, then stopped, then came again, closer each time. I told myself I was imagining it because of the rain, because sound travels weird when the forest is soaked. But something about it made my stomach feel tight. The cold air became worse as the night grew deeper. The tent walls shook lightly as the wind finally woke up. The rain became harder and sharper, hitting like gravel instead of water. The forest started to creak around me, old branches bending under the weight of water. Every now and then I heard the distant thump of something falling. Maybe loose bark, maybe a dead limb tearing free. Each noise reminded me that I was alone out there, miles from anyone, with nothing between me and the forest except thin fabric. I tried to sleep, but my mind wouldn't settle. My thoughts kept drifting back to the slow, careful steps I thought I heard earlier. So I stayed awake, listening. Hours passed like that. The rain still hammered overhead, and I lay still, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent. Then I heard it again. A soft shift, heavier than an animal, pressing into the earth, came from the left side of the tent. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my chest. I held my breath without meaning to. Another step followed, then another. They were slow, almost testing the ground. Whoever or whatever was moving outside wasn't stumbling. They were placing each foot carefully, like they wanted to stay quiet. I didn't move. I tried to convince myself it was a deer, or maybe a large raccoon digging around. But the steps were too steady, too controlled, and too heavy. I stayed frozen, breathing as quietly as I could. The steps circled the tent, stopping behind it, then shifting again to the right side. I pictured someone standing there in the dark rain, only a few feet from me, just listening to my breathing. The idea made a sharp, cold rush through my whole body. The storm grew louder for a while, and the footsteps faded. I didn't know if they had left or if the noise was just covering them. At some point, the exhaustion in my body won, and I must have fallen into a half-sleep. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up suddenly when I heard something dragging over the ground. The sound was slow and rough, like something heavy being pulled through wet dirt. It started far away, but it got closer inch by inch. I felt frozen again, staring up at the tent ceiling in the darkness, unable to make sense of it. The dragging stopped when it reached somewhere near my camp. Then there was silence. Long, deep silence. Not even the usual night animals made noise anymore. It felt like the whole forest was holding its breath. I didn't move. I didn't even shift my weight. I lay entirely still, trying to hear anything through the pounding rain. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. My body ached from staying still, but I didn't want to make a single sound. Eventually, the dragging noise started again, moving away this time, slow and steady, until it faded completely. I didn't trust it. Something about it felt wrong, too purposeful, too controlled, like someone was pulling something heavy they didn't want anyone to see. I waited until the first faint light of dawn showed through the tent walls. The storm was finally dying down, the rain softer, the forest waking up again. I forced myself to unzip the tent. The cold morning air hit my face, and I stepped out onto the soaked ground. Everything looked gray and washed out. The soil around my tent was covered in strange impressions. Not footsteps exactly, but deep marks, like someone had been kneeling or pressing something into the earth. I followed the trail of disturbed ground a little way from my camp. The mud was torn up, showing the path of whatever had been dragged. The trail led deeper into the trees, but I didn't follow it far. I stopped when I reached a spot where the earth was dug up in wide patches. Something had been buried there recently, the soil still loose and uneven. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to understand if it was an animal or something else. The shape was too big, too irregular, and too strangely placed to make sense. I didn't want to go closer. I didn't want to know. Everything in me told me to leave. My chest felt tight the whole walk back to my tent. I packed fast, stuffing my wet gear into the car. I didn't care about folding anything. I just wanted to get out of that forest. As I drove away, I kept looking at the mirror, half expecting someone to step out of the trees and watch me leave. When I finally reached the main road, I felt like I could breathe again. The rain had stopped, the daylight brighter, and the world felt alive and normal. Nothing like the heavy silence of the night before. But even now, when I think about that muddy patch of earth and the slow dragging sounds, a chill runs through me. I know there was someone out there that night, someone moving through the rain with something heavy, someone who walked right around my tent and listened to me breathe. I didn't report it. I didn't take photos. I didn't go back. I just drove home and tried to forget. But sometimes, late at night, when rain hits my window in that same steady rhythm, I remember the soft steps circling me in the dark. And I know that if I had stepped outside my tent at the wrong moment, if I had made one noise too loud, I might have ended up as another patch of loose earth in that silent, soaked forest. And that is the reason I never camp alone anymore. Not because of ghosts or strange creatures, but because there are real people out there, hidden in the rain and the trees, doing things you don't ever want to understand, and the darkness of the forest gives them all the cover they need. I drove out to the old Black Pine Quarry in northern Idaho in late August of 2019, just after my 23rd birthday. I had been wanting a quiet weekend away from people, away from screens, away from everything that made my head feel noisy. The quarry had been shut down years before I was even born. Most people avoided it now because the ground was unstable, the trails were washed out, and the place had a reputation for being unsafe. But I wanted something silent and empty, somewhere I could breathe without hearing traffic or neighbors yelling. So I packed my tent, my old sleeping bag, a small cooler, and planned to stay one night. I told myself I could handle one night alone anywhere. The drive took hours. The last stretch of road was nothing more than a narrow dirt track with deep grooves carved by past rain. My car shook the whole time, and dust covered every surface inside. I kept checking the clock on my dashboard, wanting to reach before sunset. When the trees thinned and the ground fell away into the wide pit of the quarry, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The place looked abandoned in the worst kind of way. Rusted metal frames sticking out of the dirt, old tire tracks filled with standing water, and hills of loose stones that looked ready to slide down at the smallest touch. I parked near a flat spot a little higher up, far from the steep edges but still close enough to see the quarry floor. I set my tent near a patch of dry grass. The air smelled sharp, like dust and hot rocks. Even in the fading light, everything looked washed out, like the whole place had been left under a heat lamp for too long. After setting up my camp, I walked around the area just to get a sense of the layout. There were old pieces of machinery left behind, broken and rusting. A large conveyor frame leaned sideways like a skeleton. Metal scraps stuck out of the dirt. The ground dipped and rose unpredictably. I remember seeing a black boot print in a patch of clay near a puddle that didn't look fresh but didn't look very old either. It wasn't mine. That stuck in my mind more than I wanted to admit. I tried to push it away by telling myself hunters or hikers probably came through here sometimes. By the time the sun dropped behind the trees, the temperature fell quickly. I lit my little camp stove, heated some canned soup, and ate sitting on a folding chair. The quiet was heavier than I expected. Even the insects were strangely muted. The only sound was the occasional creak of the cooling metal from my car. Every time the noise broke the silence, I felt a jolt run through me. When it finally got dark, it got extremely dark. The quarry had no lights anywhere, and the sky clouded over, hiding the moon. My small lantern barely reached a few feet past my tent. Everything else around me looked like a wall of black space. I tried to relax and lie down, but the ground under my tent felt uneven. I shifted my sleeping bag several times. My nerves wouldn't settle. I kept thinking about the shape of that boot print, how deep it was, how the edges didn't look as weathered as everything else. I tried forcing my mind onto something else, but the silence pressed against my ears so hard that my thoughts kept circling back to it. Around what I guessed was midnight, I heard the first sound. It wasn't loud, but it wasn't natural either. A single hard crack of stone against stone, echoing off the quarry walls. I froze in my sleeping bag. I tried to tell myself rocks slide on their own all the time. The place was unstable. Maybe the wind loosened something. But there was no wind. The air felt completely still. A few minutes passed. Then another sound. This one closer. Not a crack this time. More like the crunch of gravel under a foot. I held my breath without thinking. I waited, hoping it was an animal. But the steps came in slow, uneven patterns, like someone trying to move quietly but not caring enough to hide everything. I lifted my head just slightly, feeling my heartbeat hammer inside my throat. My tent walls looked thin in the darkness. My lantern was switched off because I never sleep with it on, so I couldn't see anything outside except the vague shape of the zipper area. Then the steps stopped. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Not outside and barely inside my chest. I had the sickening sense that someone was standing right beyond the thin fabric of my tent. I didn't hear breathing, but I could feel the presence, that heavy tension you feel when a person stands too close behind you. I stayed completely still, every muscle in my body locked up. The silence stretched on so long that I started wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe the sound came from farther away. Maybe I misheard. My mind tried to grasp any explanation that didn't include another human being standing outside my tent at midnight in an abandoned quarry. Just when I started to believe I had scared myself for nothing, I heard it. The faint scrape of something dragging lightly across the outside of my tent wall. A slow, thin sound, like a fingertip or a nail brushing fabric. My skin felt like it pulled tight against my bones. I didn't move at all. I didn't breathe for several seconds. The dragging stopped. Then, without warning, quick, heavy steps moved away from the tent, running but not in a straight line. More like moving from one point to another across the loose gravel, then stopping again. I lay there listening to the sounds fade and then return from different angles. It was like someone was circling the camp but staying out of my direct view. I didn't dare open the tent or look outside. I didn't want to see anything. I didn't want anything to see me. Maybe half an hour passed. Maybe more. Time didn't feel real. The footsteps eventually drifted farther and farther away until I couldn't hear them anymore. I waited even longer. I stayed awake until dawn, lying there stiff and alert, staring at the ceiling of the tent even when my eyes felt like they were burning. When the light finally rose and the sky turned pale gray, I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The air felt cold and wet. My shirt clung to my back from sweating all night. The ground around my tent had prints in the dirt. Not animal prints, shoe prints, different from mine, wider, heavier. They circled the tent in uneven arcs. One set came close, too close, almost touching the edge of my tent's footprint. There were drag marks too, thin streaks in the dust near one side of the tent. I didn't want to think about what made them. I packed my things fast, shoving gear into the car with shaking hands. Every sound I made felt too loud. I kept glancing up the quarry slopes, expecting to see someone standing there. The entire place felt wrong now, like the air carried something left over from the night. The last thing I noticed before driving away was a crushed water bottle near one of the old metal beams. Half buried, but definitely not mine. Its plastic looked too new. I hadn't seen it the day before when I walked around. Someone else had been there. Someone who didn't want to be seen. When I finally reached the main road, the tension in my chest loosened a little, but the fear stayed. It stayed for weeks. Every time I tried to sleep after that trip, I remembered the sound of gravel shifting under someone's weight and the slow scrape along the side of my tent. The ending is simple and real. Nothing supernatural. No mysteri monster. Just the reality that the most dangerous thing in the dark is another person who shouldn't be there. I never went back to Black Pine Quarry, and I never camped alone again.